It all started that morning. The message from Jack came in unexpectedly, but it didn't surprise me. I had known something was off for weeks. The air felt different, colder somehow, as I picked up my phone and saw the message, "We need to talk." My heart sank. I had always trusted him, believed in the strength of what we had, but now, I wasn't sure anymore. The hours before that moment had been filled with too many doubts, too many little signs that something wasn't right. His late nights, his guarded behavior. But this message, it was the final piece of the puzzle I hadn't wanted to see. I had ignored the whispers of suspicion, hoping it was just my mind playing tricks, but deep down, I knew the truth would come crashing down soon enough. As I stared at the screen, I knew we couldn't go on like this. What does he want to say? I whispered to myself. But deep inside, I already knew. It wasn't easy, but I finally shut the door on him. Jack had never been the kind of person who would just admit when he was wrong. I knew that, but it still didn't make this moment any easier. I stood there for a long while, staring at the door. Part of me wanted to open it again, to let him in, to hear his side, to understand what had gone wrong. But the truth was, I already knew. I had seen the signs. His late-night work meetings, his increasingly distant attitude, and the texts he would never let me see. I should have confronted him sooner. Maybe I wouldn't have felt this way now. But as much as I wanted to change what happened, I knew that nothing could take away what was already done. Slowly, I walked back to the couch and collapsed into it. I couldn't cry. Not yet. I was too angry for that. But I could feel the tears building in the back of my throat, ready to spill at any moment. I couldn't stay at home. I couldn't stand the thought of being in that apartment for one more second, staring at the walls where Jack and I had made so many memories. So I grabbed my jacket and left. The night air hit me like a slap, cold and biting. But it felt good. I needed the space to think, to breathe, to process everything. I walked aimlessly, my feet carrying me farther away from the place I had once called home. I found myself at the pier. The sound of the water, the gentle crash of the waves, brought some peace to my mind. I stared out at the dark horizon, not knowing what would come next. Part of me was terrified. I had built my life around Jack, around us. And now, I was alone. But another part of me, the part I had buried for so long, felt a spark of freedom. The walk by the pier did nothing to calm my racing mind, but it was enough to put some distance between me and everything that had happened. I needed to process it. I needed to heal. But where do you start when the person you trusted most has torn apart everything you believed in? The thought of Jack, his face, his lies, made my stomach churn. I wanted to scream, to throw something, but the silence of the night pressed down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. I pulled out my phone and called my sister, Sarah. She had always been the one I turned to in moments like this. When the call connected, I didn't wait for her to speak. "Jack," I said, my voice shaking, "he betrayed me. He's been cheating." Sarah didn't need to say anything. She had known something was off long before I did. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice filled with sympathy. "You deserve so much more than that, Em." I wanted to break down, but I couldn't. I had to stay strong. "I'm done with him, Sarah. I can't go back to that." The words felt like they were coming from someone else. But they were true. I had to let go. I had no other choice. "I'm coming over," Sarah said, and I could hear the determination in her voice. "You don't have to do this alone." I hung up the phone and looked out at the water again. This time, there was no uncertainty. There was only the calm certainty that I was done. The days that followed were a blur of emotions, phone calls, and heart-to-heart conversations. Sarah arrived at my apartment within an hour of my call, and I could see the concern in her eyes as she wrapped me in a tight hug. "You don't have to face this alone," she repeated over and over. Her presence was comforting, but still, the reality of what had happened was too fresh to digest. I spent the next few days keeping to myself, allowing myself time to think and process. Jack had tried reaching out, but each time I ignored his calls. He was sorry, he said. He loved me. But the words felt empty now. I had to focus on me. I had to rebuild, piece by piece. I finally decided to meet with Jack, but not to forgive him, not yet. I needed to hear him out. I needed to hear the truth, the whole truth. The place he chose was a small cafe we used to visit. A place filled with memories, both good and bad. As I walked in, I saw him sitting by the window, nervously twirling his coffee cup. When he saw me, his face fell, and for a moment I thought he would come to me, apologize, beg for forgiveness. But instead he just sat there, looking defeated. "I didn't want to hurt you," Jack began, his voice cracking. I thought I could make it right. I crossed my arms, holding myself together. "You can't make this right, Jack," I said, my tone firm, no longer full of hope, but of the finality that came with the truth. "You lied to me, over and over." He tried to explain himself, but the words just didn't reach me. I didn't care about his excuses anymore. I had spent so many nights wondering if there was something I had missed, something I could have done differently. But now, it didn't matter. The trust was gone. "I loved you," Jack said, his eyes filled with regret. "I was stupid, and I messed everything up." "You don't get to do this now," I replied, my voice quiet but steady. "You don't get to break me then come back when it's convenient for you." The silence that followed was thick. For a moment we just sat there, the weight of everything hanging between us. Then, without another word, I stood up and walked away. That night, I didn't sleep. I spent hours lying awake, thinking about everything that had happened. The betrayal stung more than I ever thought it would. But as the hours ticked by, I realized something crucial. I was still here. I had made it through the worst of it. I wasn't broken. I wasn't going to let Jack's lies destroy me. The next morning, I decided to take control. I didn't need him. I didn't need anyone who couldn't value me for who I was. It was time to put the past behind me and move forward. I didn't know exactly what that future looked like, but I knew it would be better without him in it. The next few weeks felt like an emotional whirlwind. But each day I felt stronger. I began focusing on myself, spending time with Sarah, and reconnecting with my passions. I started taking long walks again, rediscovered my love for painting, and even signed up for a cooking class, something I had always wanted to try but never had the time for. Slowly, I began to find joy in the small things, and in doing so I found parts of myself that I had forgotten. One evening, while out with Sarah, I met someone new, Dylan. He was kind, funny, and easy to talk to. We exchanged numbers, and though it was too early for anything serious, I couldn't help but feel a spark. It was the first time in a long while that I allowed myself to think about the possibility of a future with someone else. It felt strange at first, letting someone else into my life after all that had happened. But Dylan was different. He didn't push me, didn't try to fix me. He just listened and let me take things at my pace. I started to enjoy his company more with each passing day, even though my mind occasionally wandered back to Jack. Dylan was kind, understanding, but there was always that fear lurking. What if I was making the same mistake again? "I don't want to rush anything," I told him one evening as we walked along the beach. "I just need time to figure things out." Dylan smiled, his hand brushing mine. "Take all the time you need, Emily. I'm not going anywhere." His words were a balm to the rawness I still felt. It was a reminder that maybe, just maybe, I was capable of finding happiness again. The more time I spent with Dylan, the more I realized that he wasn't just a distraction. He wasn't just filling the space Jack had left behind. Dylan made me feel seen, truly seen, for who I was, not for the version Jack had once known. He asked questions, not to pry but to understand me. One afternoon he invited me to a local art gallery. We wandered through the exhibits, talking about everything and nothing at all. For the first time in a long time, I felt my heart open, just a little. As we stood in front of a painting, Dylan turned to me, his eyes bright. "You know," he said, "I think you've got an artist's soul." His words stirred something deep inside me. I hadn't painted in months, maybe years, but I remembered how it used to feel to create. Maybe it's time to pick up the brush again, I whispered. A few days later, I found myself standing in front of an easel, paintbrush in hand. It was awkward at first, my movements stiff and unsure. I hadn't painted in so long, and the memories of Jack's betrayal felt like an anchor around my neck. But as the colors began to blend on the canvas, something shifted inside me. The pain, the anger, the heartbreak, it all started to melt away with every stroke. I wasn't painting for anyone else. I was painting for me. I was creating something beautiful from the mess that had been my life. The more I painted, the more I realized how much power I had over my own healing. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened, but about reclaiming my own strength. It wasn't just the painting that helped me heal. I started setting boundaries too. I couldn't allow Jack back into my life, not in the way I had before. I didn't owe him forgiveness, not immediately, and certainly not at the cost of my own well-being. He reached out a few more times, asking to talk, but each time I ignored his messages. The silence spoke louder than any words could. Jack had had his chance, and he had broken my trust. I had no room for people who couldn't value me. One evening, while I was out with Dylan, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Jack. "I miss you, Em. Please, can we talk?" I felt a pang in my chest, but it wasn't because I wanted him back. It was because I had finally realized he wasn't the person I needed anymore. I needed to be my own person, and that meant saying goodbye to the past for good. By the end of the month, I felt different. Not perfect, but better. Stronger. I had learned to trust myself again, to believe in my ability to choose my path. Dylan and I had grown closer, and while I wasn't rushing into anything, I couldn't deny that he had become a steady presence in my life. We continued to explore new things together, going to new restaurants, visiting parks, even trying out dance lessons. Each new experience made me feel more whole, more alive. One evening, as we sat under the stars, Dylan took my hand and looked at me with those soft, sincere eyes. "I'm glad you're letting me in," he said quietly. "I'm glad I get to be part of this new chapter." I smiled, squeezing his hand. "Me too," I whispered, realizing that for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of the future anymore. I was ready for it. I was finally starting to feel like myself again. Every day felt like a small victory. Getting out of bed without the heavy weight of sadness, making plans without feeling guilty, and even laughing again. Dylan had been there every step of the way, never rushing me, never pushing for more than I was ready to give. But then one evening, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Emily?" The voice on the other end was deep and familiar. It was Jack. My heart dropped to my stomach. "We need to talk. I've made a terrible mistake," he said, his voice shaky. I froze. I wasn't sure what I expected, but it certainly wasn't this. The old familiar feelings of confusion and anger bubbled up inside me, but I couldn't let him do this to me again. "I'm done, Jack," I said firmly, my voice barely above a whisper. "There's nothing left to talk about." After the call, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to me. Jack's voice haunted me. His words, full of regret, full of promises, sounded like the man I used to love, but I knew better now. I couldn't go back. I couldn't risk reopening that chapter. Dylan noticed my shift in mood, his gaze full of concern as I sat down next to him on the couch. "What happened?" he asked softly. I explained everything. The call, the words, the temptation to just hear him out. Dylan didn't say anything at first, just held my hand tighter, giving me the space to breathe. Finally, he spoke. "You're not that person anymore, Em. You're stronger than that. Don't let him pull you back." His words were a lifeline. And for the first time in days, I felt a sense of clarity. He was right. I was stronger now. I wasn't the same person who had trusted Jack blindly. I had grown. I spent the next few days focused on what Dylan had said. I wasn't that person anymore, and it was time to stop letting my past define me. I went to the art studio for the first time in months, standing in front of the blank canvas as if I were meeting an old friend. The brush felt unfamiliar in my hand, yet it felt like the most natural thing in the world. As I painted, I let go of the old hurt, the old doubts, and I filled the canvas with colors I had long forgotten. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was pretending to be okay. I was okay. And I was becoming more than okay. I was becoming whole. I worked through my pain, through the emotions Jack's betrayal had left me with, and created something beautiful. As the days went by, I started to notice a shift in myself. I was becoming more confident, more comfortable in my own skin. Dylan and I had grown closer, our connection deepening in a way I hadn't expected. He was always there, offering me a safe space to be myself, without any expectations or pressure. But just as everything seemed to be falling into place, Jack resurfaced. I ran into him one afternoon while walking home. He looked different, guilt in his eyes, but also a sense of desperation. "I know I hurt you, Emily," he said, his voice low. "But I need to tell you something important. Something you don't know." I stopped in my tracks, my heart racing. Part of me wanted to walk away, to ignore him completely, but curiosity pulled me in. "What is it?" I asked, bracing myself for whatever came next. Jack took a deep breath before speaking, his words coming out in a rush. "I never wanted to hurt you, Emily. I made a mistake and I've been living with it ever since. The affair, it wasn't just about me and her. It was about me not facing my own insecurities." He paused, waiting for me to say something, but I didn't know how to respond. I couldn't believe the words he was saying. "Why now?" I asked quietly. "Why tell me this now, when it's too late?" Jack shook his head, tears welling up in his eyes. "Because I want to make things right, Emily. I want to fix this. I want us to try again." His words hit me like a punch, and for a moment, I felt the old familiar pull, the hope that maybe we could rebuild. But then, I remembered everything. The lies, the hurt. I couldn't go back to that. I walked away from Jack that day, but the conversation lingered in my mind. It was the closure I had never expected, but it didn't change anything. I was done with him. I had spent too long in the shadows of his lies, too long waiting for someone who wasn't capable of loving me the way I deserved. The next morning I woke up feeling different. There was no guilt, no hesitation in my heart. For the first time in a long while, I felt free. Dylan, too, had noticed the change in me. He had been patient, understanding, and never once tried to rush me into anything. Our connection had deepened, but it was more than just about romance. It was about trust, understanding, and mutual respect. Over coffee, he looked at me, his smile soft and genuine. "I see you, Emily," he said quietly. "I see the strength you've found in yourself." His words hit me deep, and for the first time in months, I felt truly seen. Things with Dylan continued to grow, and while I wasn't in a rush to define what we were, it was clear we had something special. One evening, as we were walking back from a concert, he stopped me on the street, his expression serious but warm. "I know you're not ready to jump into something," Dylan began, "but I want you to know, I'm here. I want to be here for you, through everything, whenever you're ready." His words made my heart skip a beat. I had never felt so valued, so understood. In that moment, I realized that I wasn't just healing from Jack's betrayal. I was building something real with Dylan. Something that had the potential to be stronger, healthier, and more lasting. "I'm ready," I whispered, my voice steady. "I'm ready to move forward with you." Dylan's eyes softened, and he took my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine. It was a promise, not just to him, but to myself, that I was choosing happiness, choosing love, and choosing my future. As the weeks passed, I continued to focus on rebuilding my life. The hurt from the past still lingered, but it no longer had a hold on me. I returned to painting regularly, and each stroke of the brush was like a small act of self-reclamation. Dylan continued to support me, but it wasn't just his presence that healed me. It was my own strength. I realized I wasn't the person who had been consumed by betrayal anymore. I wasn't the person who had let someone's actions define my worth. I had become someone who knew their own value, someone who didn't need to be rescued, but who was capable of rising on their own. One afternoon, Sarah came over to visit, and when I opened the door, she threw her arms around me. "You look different, Em," she said, her voice full of pride. "You look like you've finally come back to yourself." I smiled, the warmth of her words settling in my chest. "I have," I said quietly. "I finally have." I had learned so much over the past months, about myself, about love, and about the strength that comes from healing. But just as I was starting to think my life had returned to a sense of normalcy, the unexpected happened. Jack showed up at my apartment again. I had thought he understood my decision, but when I saw him standing at my door, his face full of desperation, I realized just how wrong I had been. "Emily, please," he said, his voice shaking. "I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I've changed. Can't we try again?" My heart raced, but not with the love I used to feel. This time, it was anger. Anger at myself for ever letting him back in. "No, Jack," I said, my voice steady and final. "It's over. You had your chance, and you threw it away." I closed the door behind me, blocking out the echoes of his pleas. I wasn't going back to the past. I was done. I didn't look back after closing that door. I didn't need to. That chapter was finally over. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't thought possible. Dylan was right by my side through it all, not once asking for more than I was ready to give. The next few weeks were spent in quiet reflection, deepening the bond between Dylan and me, and focusing on the things that made me feel whole. One evening, as we sat on the balcony, watching the sun set, Dylan turned to me with a soft smile. "I don't need to fix anything about you, Emily," he said quietly. "You're perfect as you are." His words, simple and sincere, resonated deep within me. For the first time in a long while I truly believed them. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you for seeing me." Life had a way of moving forward, sometimes faster than we could keep up. As the months passed, things with Dylan became more serious, and for the first time, I began to entertain the thought of a future that didn't revolve around my past. We talked about travel, about dreams, about a life we could build together. But still, there were moments when my heart would clench with doubt. Was I truly healed, or was I just burying the pain? Dylan noticed the shift in me one evening when we were sitting on the couch. "Emily, you've come so far," he said gently. "But it's okay to still have some scars." His words were a comfort, and yet, they made me question, was I hiding from my own healing? "I don't know if I can ever fully forgive Jack," I confessed. "I don't know if I'll ever be the same again." Dylan reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "You don't need to be perfect, Em. You just need to keep moving forward." That conversation stuck with me for days. Dylan was right, of course. I didn't need to be perfect, but there was still a part of me that wasn't ready to let go of the past. I spent the next few weeks trying to understand why I couldn't just move on completely. It wasn't about Jack anymore. It was about me, about my fear of vulnerability, my hesitation to trust. It was as if I had built this invisible wall around my heart, and every time I let someone in, I feared the same betrayal would happen again. It was frustrating, but also liberating to realize that these feelings didn't have to define me. I had control over how I healed. And the more I accepted my imperfections, the more at peace I became. One afternoon, I finally decided to take the step I had been avoiding for so long. I visited Jack's old apartment, the place where all the lies had begun. It wasn't about confronting him, but about confronting myself. When I walked away from that building, something inside me had shifted. The weight I had been carrying for so long felt just a little bit lighter. I wasn't forgiving Jack, but I was forgiving myself for holding on to the past. The next few days were a blur of introspection and growth. I spent time with friends, painting and living without the constant fear that something was about to collapse. Dylan and I were stronger than ever, and for the first time, I allowed myself to be vulnerable with him. "I've been thinking," I said one evening as we walked through the park, "about how far I've come, and how much I've let go." Dylan smiled, his hand brushing mine. "You've done the hard work, Emily. It's okay to finally let go of the past and embrace what's ahead." I realized then that I wasn't just healing, I was evolving, becoming someone I could be proud of. As I began to embrace my newfound strength, I realized something else. I wasn't just healing for myself, but for everyone around me. I had spent so much time focusing on the damage done to me that I had forgotten how to be there for the people I love. One afternoon I called Sarah and invited her over for lunch. It had been a while since we had spent quality time together. As we ate and laughed, I realized how much I had missed these moments. Sarah's presence was a reminder of everything I had to be thankful for, of the love and support I had, even when I thought I had nothing left. "You've come so far, Em," Sarah said as we cleared the table. "I'm so proud of you." Hearing those words made something inside me click. I had let go of my past, yes, but I had also found my future. And it was filled with love, support, and the people who mattered most. By the time the holidays rolled around, I was in a place I never thought I'd reach. My heart was lighter, and the constant worry of the past had finally been replaced by excitement for the future. Dylan and I spent Christmas together, just the two of us, and it was everything I had imagined. Quiet, peaceful, and filled with warmth. We exchanged gifts, shared a meal, and sat by the fire, simply enjoying each other's company. It felt like a new beginning, a fresh start. "I'm glad I met you, Emily," Dylan said as we watched the fire crackle. "You're not the same person I met a year ago, and I think that's what makes you so special." I smiled, feeling the truth in his words. I wasn't the same person I used to be, but that wasn't a bad thing. I had become someone stronger, someone who had learned the true meaning of love and healing. The months after the holidays felt like a new chapter of my life. Dylan and I were inseparable, our relationship blossoming into something that felt real, grounded, and true. I was finally at peace with myself. But even in this newfound tranquility, I knew that there would always be echoes of the past. The road to healing was never a straight line, and I was reminded of that when I received an unexpected message one evening. It was from Jack. I hadn't heard from him in months, and seeing his name on my phone screen sent a shockwave through me. My hands trembled as I read the message. "I've made a terrible mistake, Emily. I know it's too late, but I had to tell you that I'm sorry. I'll always regret what I did to you." For a brief moment, I felt the old feeling surge. The confusion, the hurt, the temptation to answer. But then, I remembered everything. I remembered my worth. I remembered Dylan. And most of all, I remembered that I had moved on. Without hesitation, I deleted the message and blocked his number. There was no going back, no more holding on to ghosts. Dylan and I continued to build our life together, and I could feel my heart expanding in ways I never thought possible. We spent weekends traveling, trying new things, and enjoying the little moments that made life so beautiful. I had come to realize that the past no longer had a grip on me. The pain, the betrayal, it was just a part of who I used to be. It didn't define me anymore. One afternoon, as we sat by the lake, watching the sunset, Dylan turned to me with a smile that made my heart flutter. "You've changed, Emily," he said softly. "In the best way possible. And I'm so grateful I get to be a part of your journey." His words made me smile, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to explain myself. I wasn't perfect, but I was exactly where I needed to be. I had found peace, and I had found love, not the kind I thought I wanted, but the kind that made me whole. As the seasons changed, so did I. I found myself not just healed, but thriving. My art, once a way to cope with pain, had become a passion again, and I was finally able to exhibit my work in a local gallery. The night of my first exhibition was a culmination of everything I had fought for. Dylan stood beside me, his pride in me obvious as we spoke to the guests who came to see my paintings. "You're amazing," he whispered to me as we took a break, stepping outside for a moment of quiet. I could hardly believe how far I had come, how far we had come together. My life, once torn apart by betrayal, was now filled with love, success, and the kind of peace I had always longed for. I had embraced the possibility of my own happiness, and I wasn't looking back. It had been a year since everything changed, and as I reflected on all that had happened, I realized that the person I was now was far stronger and more resilient than the person I had once been. But it wasn't just about healing, it was about growth. I had learned that my worth wasn't tied to the people who hurt me, nor was it determined by anyone's love but my own. Dylan and I had built something real, something that wasn't based on fixing brokenness, but on creating something whole and beautiful together. As we stood in the kitchen that evening, cooking dinner, I realized how far we had come, how much we had grown. I never thought I could feel this way again, I told him, my voice filled with emotion. I didn't think I could trust again. Dylan turned to face me, his expression warm. And now you know you can, he said. You've proven that. His words meant everything. I had healed. And I had learned to love again, not just him but myself. As the year came to a close, I found myself standing on a new threshold. The pain from the past had finally faded into the distance, and in its place was a future filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities. I wasn't defined by the betrayals or the mistakes I had made or that had been made against me. I was defined by my strength, by my ability to rise again. As I stood with Dylan on the balcony, watching the fireworks light up the night sky, I knew that this was just the beginning. Whatever came next, I was ready. Happy New Year, Em, Dylan said, his voice filled with promise. Happy New Year, I replied, my heart full. In that moment, I realized that I had finally become the person I was always meant to be, not perfect, but whole. And that was enough.